Well, another round of submissions for the upcoming ARK Survival Ascent edition has begun, but this time there's been a change to the rules, and it's one that I think could have some big implications. Alright folks, my name is Freyn, and yes, today I am once again talking ARK creature votes, this time about the submission system as a whole though, what I think needs changing about it, and some general thoughts on the community's approach to the creatures themselves. But where do we begin? Well, the community crunch dropped on Friday night, heralding the start of the centre vote, and with it the announcement that posts will no longer be merged with similar submissions. Up until now, Wildcard have been very clear that while the design ideas put forth are used for final inspiration, the submission has always been intended to be about the creature itself. That you're not actually submitting a shark with high-powered circular saw and a love of metal, just a basic Helicoprium. But this change really works against that. Almost every submission should now receive its own post and therefore its own vote, and as they are all based on real creatures, the abilities are the only thing there could be to differentiate one Deinonychirus from the next. And in many ways this is a great change. The last vote, for instance, there was two alternative designs for the Paleoctopus. One was a mid-sized mount with inkjet propulsion, and the other was a small shoulder pet for budding supervillains. They were so drastically different that they should have been treated as an entirely different creature, and it's kind of odd that the only thing that prevented that was that both chose the same species name. Another issue for this duplicate suggestions is that most people only really read the first post, so if you didn't get in quick, yours might end up being a forgotten footnote in another thread. Whereas now everyone has a much more clear idea of what they're voting on. But it's not all good. It could end up really killing diversity among the finalists. Not only could we realistically see the same thing more than once anyway, but it's also open to exploit. There's definitely numerous creatures that have a big following, and if all of those people group together, they could effectively submit 5 different designs for the same creature, collectively upvote all of them, and turn half of the top 10 into Gorgonopsid clones. But in my opinion, it is a step in the right direction, although I feel the submission process really needs a bigger overhaul. There is multiple issues with it at present, some of which could be solved, some merely mitigated. Now in my opinion, these are chiefly that early posters have the most success. Within an hour of the forum opening this time, there was already 4 pages, that's over 75 submissions, and as we hit the 12-hour mark, that had hit 250. But the vast bulk of these have 0 to 5 votes. Now, sure, in a lot of cases the creature just isn't appealing or it wasn't marketed very well, but really, how many of us are going to read through all of those threads? I'm certainly not, and unfortunately this means that we look at the first couple of pages at most, which will either be ordered by the most existing votes, most replies, or what was replied to most recently. And all of these are more likely to happen if it's been up for longer. Similar to a lot of elections as well, the populace rarely votes for a smaller party because they know it's often got no chance and becomes a wasted vote. So coming in a few days later and seeing that a creature you love is already down on the 3rd page, you're probably going to be quite discouraged. And this is further exacerbated by the community crunch timing. For Europe, it's in the middle of the night. A lot of submissions from Europeans are going to be delayed and already starting on the back foot before they've even been posted. Honestly, making some of these videos has been kind of a pain for me, as YouTube runs on the similar system. The more popular your video is, the more it gets promoted, and a newer and smaller channel like my own really has to get in as soon as possible. So I find myself scraping videos together at 5 AM due to that community crunch time. Now obviously no time will be perfect for every time zone, it's just not possible, but a few hours could allow a much bigger selection of the player base to also get in on this. And of course it would help me personally quite a bit. Next we have the influencer influence. Every vote, I've been told, has included at least one submission from a popular content creator. Naturally, if they have a good idea, of course, they should put it forwards. But these are always going to get a high number of votes regardless of whether they're actually good for the game or good quality. It's not something that can ever truly be eliminated, as unscrupulous people will always just direct a legion of followers to vote on a certain thing anyway, regardless of whether they submitted it, but it's still a thing. Everyone can critique, of course, but we need to be constructive, so how would I change it? Well, I've had a few thoughts. The first of which I had was that vote counts should be hidden on the forum, so everything is treated equally. But honestly, there is far too many submissions for this to realistically work unless categorized in some way, and even then, it's still too many. So we'll put that idea aside, and let's focus on the timing instead. I think the best way around this is to have a form of delayed posting. Players would submit their ideas as soon as it opens, of course, but then nothing actually appears on the forum for a few days, at which point it all shows up at the same time. Now, we could take this a step further and have the posting be done via some form of external submission form that is then mass posted via a bot, keeping the author's identity secret and helping to eliminate some of that influence and keep it strictly about the creature. But again, this has its own problems as designs couldn't be edited and there's nothing to stop people saying it's their idea on social media anyway. So probably best to put that one on the maybe pile. But the bigger change I'd like to see is in the second round, the finalists. And what I would like to see is the dev taking away the list of top 10 and coming back with a brief outline of how they would implement it if it was to win. That way we would all know exactly what we're voting for, it'd eliminate the arguments of which of a creature's 137 abilities it might receive, and it would reduce a lot of the complaints that come from suggestions not being properly read off the back of the "they'll change it anyway" argument. Especially as that's got a lot of evidence mounting against it lately. But perhaps the first round should be eliminated entirely to make it more fair, and the devs simply come up with 10 ideas and say which would you like. That again though, probably a step too far. The negative to both of these, of course, is a higher workload for the devs, and perhaps this whole video is just me creating issues where there aren't any. I don't know, to be honest. I've only been playing ARK for a year, so my impressions of all these things is still quite new. I've also seen rule changes suggested elsewhere too, the first of which is a 3-strike system to prevent creatures returning if they fail too many times. Now this would reduce the submission list and keep things fresh, pushing creators to target the most fitting maps with the highly polished ideas, but what if you've worked really hard and someone else enters in another vote in the meantime and it blocks you from trying? That's gonna suck. And another proposal is that something repeatedly being in the top 5 should get in anyway, but that's going to add more dev work causing delays elsewhere, and it kind of smacks of entitlement. My choice didn't win, but it should get the prize anyway. Where have we heard that before? And that brings me round to the submissions and community reactions in general, so we're going to get a bit rambly and ranty here. With every vote I've seen, there has been a complaint over another Giga or anti-Giga, whether it's forum posts, Reddit threads, or even joke submissions based on the unfounded premise that every winner is somehow designed to be top of the food chain. If that was true, it would suggest more than anything that the Giga needs a rebalance, not a new creature. But more importantly, it indicates that people simply don't look at the submissions when voting, as other than the Rhino, which literally called itself a Sky Giga, there's been nothing close to that. No one who read the Gigantoraptor submission could come away with that impression, just as anyone looking past the first sentence of the Yi Chi would know it was never meant to fly. Similarly, we have the Theropod issue, which is that any two-legged creature of decent size gets lumped under one umbrella and referred to as another apex. Again, the Gigantoraptor fell in here, as did the Myungosaurus, which was poor at combat and meant to read stats. This all further baffles me though when we consider that a lot of the most popular mods add more and more large carnivores, and they're all universally loved and often referred to as better than the official creatures. Honestly, there's no point me saying this though, as I'm not going to change anyone's mind, and of course not all of these complaints are even coming from the same people, or even same sectors of the community. Some are PvP, some are PvE, some want balance, others want power. But just take some time to read the suggestions, or if not, vote on looks, and then give it a chance. Just because something has a similar shape doesn't mean anything, and just because it's not the one that you wanted that won, doesn't mean it's awful, rigged, or that it's going to break the game. Speaking of mods though, I implore you, don't discount a creature just because it exists in mod form. While Acer will be allowing finally mods to all platforms, not all mods will of course move to Acer. And even if they do, not everyone wants to use mods, and not every server allows them. The implementations likely aren't even going to be close to the modded version anyway, and in my experience, most mods aren't particularly well balanced. Now, Aberration brought a lot of frustration that there's no fantasy creatures allowed, but I'd like to put forth that almost every submission is a fantasy submission. I don't mean things like the size changes, but when a creature comes with some form of ability list, you're basically already stepping into fantasy. And often the visual designs only loosely resemble something real world anyway. If you think about the creatures on the island, the majority of them boil down to it can bite. Occasionally they'll have a bleed or a roar effect, but none of these are especially over the top, and they're all pretty generally loved creatures. Whereas some of the most hated creatures in the game, in terms of balance, are the fantasy ones. For example, look at the Shadowmane or Managana. They're two highly divisive creatures that show just how much different parts of the community want different things. But this bleeds over into the submissions very noticeably, as while most of those early creatures have a max of 1 ability, some of these new submissions are having 10 plus and outright replace a bunch of the older ones. The power creep is incredibly noticeable. There is other things to remember too when these votes come along, such as not everyone plays with clustered maps or server transfers, and just because a creature exists on one doesn't mean there isn't place for it on another. Although, to be honest, some maps are designed to be harder than others and have powerful creatures to match, but then as soon as you apply a server transfer to it, it kind of breaks things. But just because Genesis might have a text strider doesn't mean it would fit on somewhere like Val. But even if there is some overlap with things that already exist, does it matter if it doesn't completely outright replace it? No one forgoes the Anki because the Magmasaur exists at a later stage in the game, whereas if there was something with a rapid bleed and a pack boost available at level 30, the Thyla and Direwolf will be forgotten quite quick because that's a complete upgrade. Now, two creatures could be nearly identical and still have a reason to exist though. For instance, one could be a dinosaur, the other a mammal. One could be early game, one could be late. Or honestly, sometimes people just like to see their favourite creature. Declano has no advantages over most other mid-game creatures, but I still often tame one simply because I like the real Carno. And we see this time and time again with things like the Gorgonopt submissions. Its design is different almost every vote, but it's still there. It could be almost useless and they would still want it. The only real negative to these kind of submissions is that it adds a bit of file bloat. Now, of course, at the end of the day, the vote is yours and yours alone, and while hopefully we want what's best for the game as a whole, there is no shame in choosing what would make the game more fun for you. I just ask try and be a bit more accepting if something wins that you didn't vote for, and have a bit of an open mind. Ideally, all creatures would be useful and we would be aiming to fill a niche, but there's no harm in having a simple tame that looks cool if it makes people happy. So, if you're thinking of submitting something, don't be afraid. Have a bit of fun, and remember, not everything needs to be the next best thing. A well thought out, balanced suggestion with a catchy title and good dossier artwork has a better chance than the Swiss Army tame that dominates land, sea and sky. And it would make my life a bit easier if it does reach the top 10. But thank you all for listening to my rather pointless ramblings. Let me know how wrong you think I am in the comments, and I will see you next time for the Centre finalists. My name is Freyn. Bye bye.